Hello, my name is Daniel Drezner. I'm a blogger at foreignpolicy.com, a professor of international politics at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and the author of Theories of International Politics and Zombies. And I'm speaking with?
Oh, hi. I'm Daniel H. Wilson, author of Robopocalypse, and currently just a writer. Former roboticist, current writer.
Right, but you're being modest because we're here to obviously discuss your book, which was released, I believe, last month in print, and also it's already been optioned for a movie by Steven Spielberg. Is that correct?
Yeah. Oh, and in fact, I can recently start saying that I'm a New York Times best-selling author, which is kind of incredible.
Right, you've guaranteed, therefore, that the entire Blogging Heads audience will loathe and envy you tremendously because we all think that we can have our own New York Times bestsellers.
Trust me, I was in that boat for my first 6 books that no one has heard of. So,
fair enough. Now, we should start with a little bit of your background, which is, you're not just a writer. You have a PhD in robotics from Carnegie Mellon. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I spent what I call my 20s studying robotics and robots at CMU.
And how did you segue from getting the PhD to writing novels about robots?
So, my first 6 books have all been nonfiction. So this is my first adult fiction. So I haven't been writing novels. When I was at Carnegie Mellon, I was writing a lot, and I was writing grant proposals and technical papers and research abstracts.
Really sexy stuff like that. Yes.
Yeah, really sexy stuff.
And nothing like a good grant proposal to get me going.
It did keep me, well trained in how to write nonfiction, and so I had this idea to write How to Survive a Robot Uprising when I was, finishing out my degree, and it was kind of a funny idea, and it had a funny title. And I was kind of the perfect person to write it because I knew a lot about robots and I was surrounded by roboticists. And so it's a humorous book. I just went around and asked all the roboticists I knew how they would survive if their robots attacked them. And so, that's how that panned out. And it did well. And I realized, wow, I don't have to actually go build robots. I can just write about them. It's so much faster.
Proving once again those who can't do right.
It's the path of least resistance, right?
So this is supposed to be, I believe, the Science Saturday for Blogging Heads, so I might as well ask a couple of at least mildly technical questions for someone who is a robot naive. Is there a technical difference between a robot and a computer?
Yeah, I think a robot is embodied in the real world, and I mean that's exactly why I got into robotics. I did an undergrad in computer science. And I was really into machine learning and artificial intelligence, and I was realizing, well, this is like a brain in a box. This isn't going to ever act in the real world in kind of the sort of way that would excite a 6th grader, which is about where I'm at. And so I think that sort of the technical description, the difference would be a robot is the sense, think, act paradigm is how I define a robot. So it's any mechanical artifact that can sense the environment using sensors, can make a decision using processors, and then can act in the real world using some sort of end effector. And that last step is what separates a robot from a computer. Although artificial intelligence lives primarily on computers, and I think a lot of decisions are made in the real world just guided by computer printouts that never really do act in the real world.
Right, this was the thing I was striking, and I'll start, with, I will provide spoiler alerts when necessary, but I mean, the primary, robot actor, I guess if you want to say, the primary actor in Robopocalypse is Arcos, but it struck me that he wasn't exactly a robot.
Yeah, so Arcos, Arcos is a brain in a box, or a god in a box, once you
Depending
have
on
singularity.
Well, Arcos would say that, that he was a god in a box.
Well, it's your pre-post singularity.
What an ego! I mean, really.
So, yeah, you're right. He actually has to go to a lot of trouble to manipulate people and machines around him to dig his hideout for him, put him down there, set up all his communications lines. I like to think of him as sort of like Hannibal, Hannibal Lecter. Like he's this sort of mad genius who's locked up
Who's nevertheless
somewhere.
in the cage, but can manipulate, anything outside his environment.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
a
a
big
good way.
brain.
Okay. We'll get into the guts of the book in a second, but I have to ask, because, correct me if I'm wrong, there are striking parallels in some ways between the sort of arc that you had in terms of your writing and, as someone who's an expert in the zombie genre, Max Brooks. Max Brooks started by writing a zombie survival guide, which was sort of half humorous, and then transitioned into writing World War Z, which was not humorous at all. I think you can say the finest zombie novel in existence. You too translated from writing How to Survive a Robot Uprising to Robopocalypse, which is in some ways a sort of similar metaphor. Now, to paraphrase Zombieland, I want you to prove to me that Max Brooks did not raise you in a secret fucking government lab.
No, Max Brooks, that exact series of movements that he went through with his career definitely helped pave the way for my books. I mean, because he's been incredibly successful, and both of those books did really great. And so when you're selling a book, you want to point to other books that have done really well and to convince a publisher that, look, this is something that's going to work,
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And so, I mean, absolutely. I'm so glad that Max Brooks has those books and that they've done so well, because it's really helped me make the case that I can write my books as well. So I've never spoken to Max.
Oh.
I can't believe it, too. I mean, I think at some point we're going to have to run into each other.
Have you?
But,
You have an email?
I'm
with
going to
him or
have to
anything like
shake his hand when I do meet him,
I have met him. He's a cool guy. He's a very down-to-earth guy. But and the other parallel, of course, is that they're making a film version of World War Z right now. I believe starring Brad Pitt, and as in your case, Spielberg has already optioned the book. And in fact, at what stage in the writing process were you when, in fact, the film rights had been sold?
So I wrote 100 pages of the book, and then I had an annotated table of contents describing everything else that was going to happen in the book. And then that leaked. I didn't intentionally set out to sell the film rights. I wasn't planning on doing that right then. I was trying to sell the book first to a publisher. And so that leaked.
Oh, so
the book ended up...
you didn't even have a publisher yet when you... Wow, this is impressive. Okay, keep going.
Well, it's impressive in the way that a person can say, I chose the lottery ticket that won the lottery. You don't particularly think that person is incredibly smart or anything for having chosen those numbers, but I think that I was really in the right place at the right time with Robopocalypse. So I think that some people think that maybe I set out to sell film rights, or that I somehow convinced DreamWorks, that I even had it in my mind that this was going to be a movie, and I really didn't. I mean, it was really just, I write very visually, and the conceit of the book is that it's the protagonist is describing things that he's seeing, and so it's a very visual experience. And I think that definitely lent itself immediately to people to studios reading it and going, oh, this is definitely a movie,
Yeah.
But that wasn't intentional, so
I was
whatever,
wondering,
it's all gravy. I'm super happy about it.
what I was wondering was the sort of iteration of it. I mean, as you said, you saw it as a book, but obviously it's a visual thing. What I was wondering is, once you sold the film rights, do you think that affected, how you were writing the book? Because in some ways, you knew that as you were writing the book, it wasn't just going to come out as a book, but there was going to be a movie version of it. I mean, did that affect your style?
No, absolutely not, dude. I'm not smart enough to actually try to imagine a movie while I'm writing a book. No way. I mean. Really? How would you do that? I mean,
this wouldn't be unprecedented. I mean, like Michael Crichton, for example, I think when he wrote Rising Sun, said it, flat out, his main character, he always saw Sean Connery as that character.
Oh, I never do that. I still have never cast this. I've never seen any character except the ones that are in my head, who are the perfect characters. But that said, I do think that this process sharpened the book a lot, because, a week after I sold it, I was down there. I was meeting with the filmmakers. I met with the screenwriter, and I met with Steven and the executives, or Mr. Spielberg, and the executives and everything.
Is that what you called him?
No, I just called him Steven. I mean, he's a human being.
There we go. Okay, yeah.
But he called me New York Times bestselling author Dr. Daniel H. Wilson. I sort of insisted on that. It was, actually, I was so weirded out by the whole thing that I
Did you go down wearing your academic regalia just to intimidate them? You know, you had the PhD robes. You could figure you could do that too. That would have been cool.
I just sort of sat there wide-eyed for about 5 minutes until I slowly started learning how to talk again. But you know, we just talked robots, and we talked about, you know, what we both liked about the 100 pages and about the table of contents. That ultimately things changed a lot. But you know, what did happen was I was in this position while writing the rest of the book, where I was giving pages to the filmmakers, and so Drew Goddard was calling me up and saying, why, you know, did this happen? What's the deeper rationale behind this? And it was making me realize, oh, okay, I need to be more clear here, and I need to do, you know, more work over here. Huh. And then I also had Guy Dias, who's the production designer, who's just up for an Oscar for Inception. I mean, total badass. And he's doing all this previs and creating, you know, images and sequences. And he's saying, you know, so what does this really look like? This chapter opens up and it's just grainy video, but what's the setting? Where are we? And so then I'm realizing, oh, I need to go through and make this more clear, you know? And so knowing that I had those two guys who were both, I mean, just amazing people that are just at the top of their game, knowing that I had them reading my pages, and that they were going to want to know what it looked like, and they're going to want to know exactly why this is a pivot point in history and so on. It made me, you know, improve my game, and I had to sharpen up my writing for sure.
So in some ways, you actually managed to replicate, I mean, at least from a social science perspective, the PhD writing experience. I mean, when I got my PhD...
I had mentors, advisors, a team of advisors. Yeah.
Well, just in the sense of, you know, I mean, you know this, when you're writing a dissertation, you know that your committee is going to, you know, read it. And, you know, if you're smart, you collect the committee of the best badasses, you know, in your field with the knowledge that you better be on your game when you give them those pages. So in some ways, you kind of did the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I did. I had kind of a committee with the best advisor of all sitting at the head of the table there. The difference is that it wasn't as mean as defending a thesis, you know. Everyone's pretty supportive, and they tend to accentuate what they like instead of tearing down what's broken or wrong.
Yes, exactly. That's a fair point. That's an important difference. So, you know, it sounds like it sounds like the experience really helped you in terms of sort of crafting the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I tried to recreate that experience with my next book that I'm writing now, which is called AMP, because we sold that to Summit and tentatively got Alex Proyas attached to it to direct. And, you know, I've been talking to, they don't have a screenwriter yet, but, you know, I've been talking to the studio there. And, you know, I realized with that process, it's just this Spielberg and DreamWorks, it's just a special thing. You know, It's a once-in-a-lifetime sort of thing. And I doubt, you know, I'll be happy to have been able to do it once. It's not something I need to recreate for every book, but...
What's interesting is that you could argue Spielberg is he's an interesting filmmaker to do this kind of movie, because if you look at his past work, I mean, his very first television movie was Duel, which you know, which is about which is about a truck that basically is almost like an artificial intelligence. Or,
there's an arm that hangs out of it, right?
Right, I
that's
think so,
about it.
And then of course he made AI as well. So in some ways this is almost like those, you know, to use the Hollywoodese, it's like Duel meets AI. You know, meets some futuristic thing. So that's
I think Saving Private Ryan with robots is probably more.
that's it. It's Duel meets AI meets Saving Private Ryan.
I mean, it's going to be I don't know. I'm very much looking forward to it. I'm really optimistic about, just based on everything I've seen. Oh my God! I mean, it's going to be freaking incredible. Like the ecosystem of robots that are there, and I actually, they consulted me a little bit early on for.
I was going to ask. I mean, what role do you have in terms of the movie? Because I do know Max Brooks, and one of I think the sane things Brooks did was he sold the film rights to the book, and he has had no input since then. Because I think he didn't want to get caught up in the, is it going to be a movie, is it not? Because his process was a little more uncertain than yours, I think. But you know, this way he sort of. He advocated ownership, and I think it allows him to be serene and rich at the same time.
Yeah, well, that's true. I totally agree with that, because movies will break your heart. I mean, I've optioned off 3 separate books of mine, and you know, no movies have come out of that. I get new sort of heartbreaking news all the time. Like How to Survive a Robot Uprising has moved on and is now with Steve Pink, the guy who wrote High Fidelity and Grosse Point Blank and directed Hot Tub Time Machine. I mean, and he's going out, he's such a badass, and he's so funny, and he's going out and trying to place it, and every day it's like a new high or a new low. And it's really best to just have your own backyard where you live and you're the deity. You know, with a book, the number of people that write a book, it's like 2 people. It's like you and your editor. And when you're finished, it's your assets on the line. You can be proud of it or you can take the blame for it, but it's simple. What you finish is the end result, you know. And with a movie, the process is so long and there's so many different people and there's so many places that it can go wrong and break down that you just can't commit until they start principal photography maybe. But that said, I'm actually interested in getting playing a bigger part in future, you know, books that I'm able to sell to the studios. And so with Robopocalypse, I don't have any formal attachment, and so the fact that they even remember my name or have ever called me or that I've ever been in contact with the production designer or the filmmakers at all, that is all just, I'm so grateful for that, and I know that they don't have to do that at all, and it's really a wonderful thing. You know, on AMP, I'm actually attached as a technical advisor as part of the deal, so if they make that movie, I'll be in a more formal role, and I'll be out there making sure basically that all the technology is kind of legit. I mean, that's my main interest. Well, because creatively, they're in charge. I mean, creatively, I'm not a filmmaker. They are, you know, so I trust them.
Well, speaking of the technology, let's get into the sort of guts of the book, and I'll just start by, you know, warning our readers that if you haven't read Robopocalypse and you want to, you know, there's going to be massive spoilers. And actually, I just want to add, you know, so are you pleased with the critical reaction so far? I mean, I think Annalee Newitz in IO9, I think she wants to have your children, frankly.
Annalee is awesome. I mean, and Cory Doctorow is awesome.
Right.
Rick Kleffel, who does the Agony column, is awesome. You know, everybody has their own perspective, you know, and so I try to keep that in mind whenever they respond to the book. And the thing that makes me so happy is that people who are real science fiction geeks, people who are intimately familiar with this sprawling terrain of robot uprisings, right? Because it's a meme, it's a common theme. Yeah. But most people go, oh, it's a common theme. I've seen Terminator. I know all about robot uprisings. It's like, really? You saw one movie that came out 30 years ago, and you know all about robot uprisings? Okay, so
I'm sorry, I just need a moment. I just need a moment to realize that Terminator came out almost 30 years ago. That's just really freaking depressing. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, has anything changed in 30 years in terms of technology that maybe we want to revisit? Anyway, so that's a different rant. But what I found is that the people that are really into science fiction have really liked it, and that means a lot to me because they're the ones that know for real, you know, whether it's derivative of something or you know, when things are happening that they've seen before. And so I feel like they're the best qualified people to judge. But then, of course, I want everybody to read it and enjoy it, you know. And so casual readers have really enjoyed it. I've gotten a lot of really, really great reviews, and I'm really thankful for that. But I have found that the movie is a little bit of a mixed bag, you know. Because
well, I would assume it would generate negative feedback among the reviewers because they... Well, go ahead.
My assumption is that if Spielberg read 100 pages of something and immediately committed to directing a movie, because he did. I mean, it wasn't public that week. It didn't become public for months and months. But, you know, he shook my hand and said, I'm going to direct this movie. And, like, a week, you know? That, to me, if I was a reader, I would be like, wow, there must be something to it, right? But it's interesting because in a lot of cases it's sort of the opposite. People say, well, it'll make a great movie. And I don't quite get that, you know? I'm like, it's a good story. I mean, I think that's why people, you know, are digging it. But, you know, whatever. I think
it might be a function
too much good luck. It's
well,
too much good luck for one person.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people don't like it when, you know, others, frequently there's jealousy. And also, frankly, let's face it, it depends on the last Spielberg movie you've seen. I mean, you're right. You're absolutely right. You know, if you're talking something like Minority Report or Catch Me If You Can, you would think that this is going to be great. If, on the other hand, your last movie was Hook, well, that's a different story.
Yeah. Well, and I loved AI. I mean, I love a lot of these movies that other people have big problems with, you know.
I was going to ask, what is your favorite? I mean, you know, as you were writing this, what is your favorite sort of in the robot genre in terms of movies or books?
You know, I have short stories that I really like. My favorite robot short story is a Zelazny story called "For a Breath I Tarry," which is about basically these super intelligent AIs that are hanging out on Earth after there are no more people. It's kind of similar to the end story of AI.
Right. Yeah.
And there's this one machine that becomes very interested in recreating human beings in order to see what it was like. I mean, because it's interesting. The humans made these robots, you know, and so it finally, you know, the whole story, and then it finally manages to put itself into a human body, and it just realizes suddenly how meaningless the world is without a human being there to give it meaning. And he realizes that these omnipotent machines are just building a planet again and again for people that are never going to show up. And like the sadness and horror of it all just completely infect him and make him basically want to go insane. He manages to recover, but I love that idea about meaning and how human beings give meaning to the world, and whether machines can give meaning to the world by existing. I don't know. Sorry.
No, that's cool.
Sort
I
of
mean,
dorky themes.
I think my favorite would be the Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? You know, the basis for Blade Runner, because in some ways that's also about, you know, identity and what is it that, you know, necessarily makes human beings different from robots, and can a robot essentially acquire the same kind of consciousness and meaning?
Right.
And then followed closely by the Star Trek Next Generation episode where they have the court session where the Data is actually a person, which is actually pretty cool.
You mean when Data gets all emotional?
No. It's the one where it's from the second season where Starfleet is going to order him to go to some sort of lab where they're going to take him apart, and he protests. And Starfleet says, well, you're a machine, you're our property. And he says, no, I'm a person, so Picard has to defend him.
Oh, when he actually, gets his independence.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's called The Measure of a Man. But anyway, that's a good one. All right, so let's get on to your book. So,
sure.
To sum up your book, without giving too much away, the plot basically consists of a artificial intelligence named Arcos that is created by a lab, you know, it's a scientist in a lab, of course, it's somewhere in Washington State. The AI, I think it was I thought this was a clever touch by you. It was the 14th version that was created. Is that correct?
Yeah, I love this idea that whenever you're creating a singularity, it's sort of like atomic power, how you want to create an atomic reaction that you can harness instead of just having it explode.
Right.
But it's incredibly dangerous, right? If you add a little bit too much, you get the critical mass and then do bada bing and everything explodes. And that's really a similar thing that's going on in this lab. They're trying to create a super intelligence that's not so intelligent that it realizes that it wants to kill everybody. And so they keep creating them and then killing them because damn, it's too smart. And so they're trying to stifle the amount of information that it has up front and reduce the amount of processing it has. But what it does is it just makes more with less. And it infers connections between things. And they find that no matter how little they give it, it just seems to get super intelligent no matter what.
And unfortunately, the scientist miscalculates. Arcos kills him rather than vice versa, and then starts his plot to destroy humanity and supplant it by the machines.
And that is the most generic part of the story, I think. I mean, that is my launching pad. That's what has to happen at the beginning of these types of stories.
Right. And you know, I think actually, I thought. Speaking as a reader, the part that I found the most affecting was actually the sort of first part of your novel where, before, I guess, 0 Hour, I can't remember what it was called, where the robots, you know, they go out front and start attacking everyone. There are these little signs and incipient sort of things put in preparation for that, and there's a nice sense of foreboding and dread. The one thing I kept wondering during this period, though, is that when you see the robots act out, was this an example of Arcos' design, or were these just glitches along the way?
Well, yeah, you can imagine that this is the biggest software update ever conducted and it's across thousands of different platforms, and it's clandestine. So it has to hide itself. So it's basically, I don't go into any of these boring technological details, but it's basically a huge software upgrade, and there are gonna be problems, So you realize that when the big Happy attacks, it's because it was hit by a car in the parking lot. I just barely referenced that because nobody knows that for sure.
The big Happy being a domestic robot in the future.
Yeah. So the kid that was attacked says, it had scuffs all over it. It looked like maybe it got hit by a car. The other humanoid robot that's a companion doll in Japan, she attacks after someone fools around with her and sort of hacks into her in order to pull off a prank. And that's why she freaks out. So, yeah, most of these are glitches. And they're sort of little warning signs that are all is not well with our technology.
Well, this was one of the, in Slate, Tori Bosch had an interesting essay earlier this week talking about robots. And as you know, President Obama visited your alma mater to discuss the National Robotics Initiative. And I'm going to quote him because he said something that was almost like an endorsement for your novel.
It's a great quote.
Where he says, "You might not know this, but one of my responsibilities as Commander-in-Chief is to keep an eye on robots. And I'm pleased to report that the robots you manufacture here seem peaceful, at least for now." Really, they might as well just have that as when Spielberg makes the movie, that should be like the opening card for the movie or something.
Just a quote. Yeah, just have just that video from Obama.
Exactly. Yeah, that's all you need. But Bosch makes an interesting point, which is that, as you point out, one of the common tropes in the sort of robot apocalyptic genre is, the robot is super smart and they start to take over the world, and humans can't deal with them. But that in some ways, from our day-to-day existence, our biggest problem with robots or computers is not that they work too well or are super smart, but that they constantly break down. I kept wondering, reading your thing, to what extent would that plan have worked perfectly, or what was the likelihood that instead some malware was going to infect, half the robots and cause them to, shoot each other rather than humans?
That's so funny that you asked that, because I have seen lots of other people saying, well, if robots really decided to attack, human beings would just have no chance. So it's dumb to even contemplate it. We'd all just be dead. So, but what you're asking is, are they really capable of really doing anything, since they are so kind of crummy and they always are breaking and everything?
Well, I think the best word for robot, I think the best word is brittle, which is, if they work perfectly, I agree, there are ways in which, if they were to do what you were just going to say, they're incredibly fearsome. But anyone who's had any experience with this sort of technology knows they are brittle. They break down, they get infected, perturbations can really cause them to get screwed up.
Well, so this is a near future, and this is a place in time when humanoid robots are available for purchase. You might not buy one because it's probably would cost about what a smart car would cost, like $5,000 or something. Mm-hmm. So most people don't have one, but a lot of people do, and they work good enough to be available for sale. So what you're talking about, robots being brittle, you're talking about prototypes. You're talking about doing research and being in a lab and trying to just do one presentation where the freaking robot does what it did 5 minutes ago behind the curtain in public and doesn't break and screw up and embarrass you and your team.
Actually, I was thinking of the Roomba that I occasionally use that gets caught in an endless loop downstairs in the living room. But I take your point.
Yeah, but so yeah, I think that these robots are fairly innocuous. I think that they do two things typically. One is that when the technology gets into our lives, one, they seem innocuous because you realize, like for the Roomba, you have to structure the environment around the Roomba so that it'll function.
Right.
So you have to do a lot of work for the Roomba up front before it'll vacuum. And for me, I actually think it's easier just to vacuum. I'm looking forward to the next generation of Roombas. The other thing that happens is the technology becomes so common that it becomes mundane and it disappears and you don't notice it. Like we don't notice anti-lock brake systems anymore. We think that we're hitting the brakes and we're not. We're hitting a button that tells an AI to hit the brakes because it's much better at braking. And so those sorts of things just kind of retreat into the shadows, into the cracks and nooks and crannies of our lives. And so until they suddenly come roaring out at us, in Robopocalypse.
To this, to what extent, this actually gives rise to an interesting question, because over the last week or so, I've seen, discussions about how there's going to be self-driving cars, on the road sometime in the next 10 years. As the author of Robopocalypse, how do you feel about this?
I think it's great. People suck at driving cars. We are bad at driving cars. We should never drive cars. In fact, I was just doing an interview with somebody, and they were asking me, like, well, are robots worth it? What if robots started, or what if a humanoid robot was used to rob a bank or to rob your house or something? Is it really worth it? And the first thing I thought is, well, I don't know. We all drive cars, and it kills like 40,000 people a year on a good year. Is it worth it? We constantly make sacrifices for our technology, and we sacrifice our lives for our technology. And it blows me away the amount of bloodshed that we're willing to put up with for our technology. And cars are just, that's low-hanging fruit. That is something that we obviously need help with. Just look at the carnage. So, I'm totally pro-autonomous car. I think it's going to totally change the landscape of our nation for the better.
But I have to wonder, the problem is that I don't think we're never going to morph into a world where only, self-driving cars are on the road. I simply can't see a situation where the government regulates you're not allowed to drive a car. And my concern is that
I can.
Oh, really?
Absolutely. You can't make a car that doesn't have seatbelts. You can't make a car. You cannot legally build a car that doesn't have analog brakes. You cannot legally build a car that doesn't have there's a whole array of these safety features that are all invented independently by different companies, but which have become standard, and it's down by law. So I can totally see a near-term collision system that becomes completely required. So a car that can recognize when it's about to have a wreck and does all the safety stuff in the nanoseconds and milliseconds before the wreck. As this stuff becomes more prevalent, absolutely, there's going to be a moment in time where you will have to have a special license or something if you want to drive a car on the road. I firmly believe that.
See, my concern is that I would say two things. First, I think you're underestimating the political. There are going to be people who are just going to resist this in the same way that people are far more uncomfortable flying on planes than driving in cars, even though statistically you're far more likely to die in a car crash than you are in a plane crash at this point.
And my rebuttal to that is sort of snarky and sad, but those people are going to eventually die. that is how.
So your political plan is wait for those people to die, and then you can implement the.
I don't have a dog in this fight, as they say, but I think that's what's going to happen. I think that's how technology progresses. I think that the kids grow up with a certain model of how technology works, and if that model involves the cars driving themselves, then it's just going to be this quirky thing that Grandpa believes about having to drive his own car everywhere, and then one day, it's not going to be an issue anymore. So
I guess what I was wondering though
is the great circle of life keeps progressing.
But what I was wondering is that would it be a situation where if you had self-driving cars, they could only function truly well if they were driving in an environment where there were only other self-driving cars? Because I could see that if you had half self-driving, half human driving cars, the human driving cars would be erratic enough to throw the self-driving cars around for a loop.
No, the self-driving cars can absolutely deal with human drivers. That's already been shown at the latest DARPA Grand Challenge or whatever. And I think there's going to be maybe my whole lifetime. I don't even know if by the time I'm Grandpa and I'm getting ready to kick the bucket, whether there'll be only autonomous cars on the road. I'm just saying that eventually I think that'll happen. I think that before that, we'll have years and years where machines will be driving alongside human beings, and those will be the human beings who can't afford the autonomous cars. This is my feeling, because anybody in their right mind would choose the safest possible car for their family.
I don't know. This is where I would say, I think you're right, but on the other hand, I actually do derive some joy from driving every once in a while.
Really?
Oh yeah,
I know.
really.
People do. And in fact, I love watching the car commercials. There's all these car commercials where they go, "We're never going to put a robot in the driver's seat."
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, and it's like, it's all you, baby. And of course, those same exact car companies are obviously developing
Automated cars,
autonomous
right.
cars. They all are, only they're developing those for a different market. And so they have different marketing plans for different folks. And yeah, they're going to sell certain cars that are going to be less autonomous for certain demographics. But, you know, so me, like, I'm talking from the perspective of a guy who has a 1-year-old daughter. Like, yeah, I'm going to have the safest car. I'm there, okay? I'm not cool anymore. But there's going to be a 20-year-old kid who obviously wants a badass car and wants to be able to drive it. So,
or the 40-year-old having a midlife crisis. Don't forget those guys. I mean, you're
Right.
going to be exposed to Hollywood. You might as well get used to these people.
I'm up here in Portland, Oregon. I got no intention of going down to L.A.
So, you know, going on with the book, I think one of the things that I was struck by was, and this was surprising to me, was the extent to which Arcos and the robots wound up sort of identifying far more with nature than with man. That, you know, once they actually, you know, start controlling large swaths of territory, you know, you start seeing two things. First, the robots sort of encouraging indigenous wildlife to retake land and area. And second, as the robots evolve, one of the ways they evolve is by studying nature and by sort of, you know, using that as their template rather than their, I guess, traditional robot creation.
Well, it's called biomimetics. I mean, it's a very common way to build robots, is to study nature and derive the principles, you know, that are at use in various animals that are really well suited for their environments, and then to incorporate those principles into whatever robot you're building. You know, human beings don't design things in a vacuum. I mean, when we're designing AI, we're constantly trying to copy how the human brain works or figure out how animal brains work, or, you know, the very first thing I got into in machine learning were genetic algorithms, which is actually where you, following the tenets of evolution, you literally evolve an answer to a problem by having generations of different answers mate and have baby answers that then, you know, are spliced up. So, I mean, I think that's not that unique for the robots to get a lot of inspiration from nature. You know, what's interesting to me is I was trying to figure out what is a god in a box going to be interested in, you know, and I don't think that they'd want to kill all the people. Why? You know, why would they even care about the people, other than as a curiosity? I mean, so I'm kind of, you know, in the literature, you know, I'm just sort of, I've seen the Datas and the Bicentennial Mans and the robots that are obsessed with becoming people. I've seen the Skynets who are just obsessed with killing every single human being. I don't even get that. I mean, what is Skynet going to do after every human is dead? I mean, it's an incredibly intelligent machine. How sad that it just wants to chase humans around like rats and destroy the planet.
See, I think the most realistic one, again, this is a Star Trek, and I like the Borg. The Borg had a, you know, I mean, I'm not pro-Borg, but, you know, the Borg notion was everything else is inefficient. I'm not pro-Borg. I specifically deny and, you know, consider this a repellent ideology. But to get in the mind of the Borg thought every other civilization was imperfect and flawed, and by assimilating them could produce a better and more efficient civilization.
Yeah, so I think the Borg are a great example of the Earth to paperclips scenario, where you just have a malfunctioning robot that repeats some task again and again and again, you know, until it's converted every atom on the planet into paperclips, or until it's painted a happy face over every square inch of the planet, or, you know, like
the Wall-E robot where it's emptied all the trash.
yeah, exactly. You know, Arcos is different. I mean, so Arcos values knowledge. That's what I thought about it, and I figured that's what a brain in a box would be interested in. And, you know, Arcos is super intelligent to a level that we can't actually even imagine as human beings, you know. And so, you know, part of the thing that guided me when I was thinking about Arcos is I thought of that feeling that you get when you look up at the night sky and you're camping, or you're in the middle of nowhere, and you actually see all those stars, you know, and you realize how freaking tiny and insignificant you are, and how much is out there in the universe, right? And that feeling you get, like, that makes you feel so small. you can only hold on to that feeling for a few minutes because then you got to go live your life.
Yeah, I was
But
going to say,
Arcos-
unless you want to, like, take a gun to your head, that you
yeah,
pretty much...
but Arcos always has that feeling. Arcos
See,
is
that's
smart
interesting
enough.
because it would strike me that Arcos would have the reverse feeling. As you describe him, he is the god in a box.
No,
So-
Arcos knows how little he knows. He's smart enough to know how little he's able to grasp so far. And he's also smart
And he
enough
lacks ego.
to realize, well, I think that, if you're a big fish in a little pond, you can start to feel like a stud, but Arcos is a huge fish in a gigantic pond, and he knows the bounds of the universe, and so he knows how small even he is, and of course that makes us even more insignificant. But Arcos' real goal is Arcos realizes that life is special, that it's only here as far as he knows, and that there is this vast universe filled with rocks smashing against each other mindlessly, idiot forces of physics, very little information relative to what you can find in a worm or a nematode, just the incredibly complex structure of life and DNA and behavior and ecosystems, so he's seeing it on a micro level up through a macro level. And so he creates what I've been calling a really lush apocalypse. This is not a world where he's dropping nukes and destroying the only thing that's interesting on our planet, right?
I'd say it's really a shame that you didn't end the book with a war crimes trial of Arcos. That would have been fun. I know you couldn't do that, but it would have been hysterical if he had tried to defend himself, saying, "I didn't nuke anyone. I didn't commit war crimes as you're talking
Did you?
about."
There's a chapter. I think it's the 5th chapter where Arcos talks to one of the people that invented him,
right? Yes.
In an insane asylum, and he says, "I will." He says something along the lines of, "I'll burn your civilization down to light your way forward." Like this kind of thing. And so Arcos
I'm destroying
is
the
really,
village to save it. Yes.
He's forging something new, and he's tearing things down in order to build something else. I think that's the beauty of it. It's very subtle, and as you read and get further into the book, you start to realize that Arcos is not really even necessarily trying to kill every human. He's starting to experiment on humans. He's allowing sentient robots out there on their own.
Well, though he wasn't terribly thrilled with how that ended, but yes, no, that's a fair point.
Yeah.
No, actually, I thought that was some of the more chilling parts of the book. Was the very end where they're trying, they're in Alaska and they're trying to get to the to where Arcos is located, and you wind up with this battle between the humans and the humans controlled by the robots. I thought that was
Oh
nice.
yeah, but don't give that one away. That's my favorite reveal. When they started doing previs on that at DreamWorks, holy shit, man, that's so gross and scary.
Maybe this might be because I do the zombie thing, but basically what you were doing was you created human zombies controlled by robots. Which was kind of funky.
Meat shields. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was and that was in some ways very chilling, because one of the problems, you could argue, one of the downsides with the zombie genre is that the zombies tend not to evolve. Some of them do evolve over time. But in some ways, the most interesting thing in a zombie book is always how the humans react to the zombies. Whereas in your book, partially it's how the humans react to the robots, but it's also how the robots start to evolve over time reacting to the humans, which I like that. So that sort of complexity.
Oh, every chapter, every time you see a robot, even if it's a robot that you're familiar with, it's evolved. It's different than the one before. Like the Stumpers are not the same as you get through the book. Everything is always changing. Even Arcos, even his goals change as he watches what unfolds. So, that's what was fun. I could take all these snapshots in each chapter. Even at DreamWorks, they've got this. Because they want to make sure they don't accidentally take a fully evolved machine from the end and have it show up at the beginning. So there's an extra axis associated with each of these robots. That's the time. T equals whatever as they evolve.
And I'd say the other chilling part of the book, I thought, and I assume they'll put this in the movie, was the notion that the robots cleaned up after themselves. That was go ahead. Where there's this scene where you have when 0 Hour takes place in New York, and you've got this couple that's looking out on the streets, and after a few hours they look out and there's no debris or human, remains whatsoever, because the robots have clearly, cleaned them up and tidied up the scene.
That's about your Roomba. That's called, having a structured environment. And when you have a horde, I mean, there's no robot armies that come from anywhere. There's not enough missiles to kill every person on the planet. This is about your car, your, humanoid robot that's at your house, your phone, all that stuff. So these humanoid robots, there's an army of them that are in New York City, but they can't walk over human corpses. They weren't designed for that. They were designed by people to walk up the street to a bodega. They were designed to be in your living room. So when they start killing everybody, they realize, well, they don't realize, but they have to clean it up because they have to keep the environment structured so that they can continue to operate in it. And that's one of the key sort of, insights that some of the humans have about these robots is that at least the early evolved robots, the earlier ones, they have this weakness. Human beings are very hardy and adaptable, and we can scrabble over and under and around and through all sorts of debris, but they can't.
Right. No, and one of the things I also like, I mean, the reason I was very fond of the zombie genre, and the reason I decided to, create an IR textbook based on it was, the interesting thing about the behavior of humans in the zombie genre is that they inevitably turn on each other. In some ways, World War Z is actually unusual in that respect. If you take a look at any George Romero movie, humans, despite the fact,
always the
even though they're surrounded by a common zombie threat, they inevitably turn on each other and sabotage their efforts at escape and or survival. And you had a hint of that in the book. I mean, not a lot of it, but you had some of it in the book in terms of the way, that the Osage Nation, when they're trying to...
the Osage, yeah.
Yeah, Osage, sorry, yeah, okay. That you've got this group of teen punks that their attitude is, we don't need to worry about the robots anymore, and your point was...
Because they're in a rural area, yeah. So
right, exactly. Although this raises an interesting question. So, I mean, one of the reasons I'm interested in international relations, that's my PhD, and the reason I liked writing about zombies was because I thought it was a good sort of fantastical threat that allowed people to think creatively about sort of new threats, in world politics. I was then criticized by this by colleagues, including Charlie Carpenter, who appears on Blogging Heads, arguing that I should have actually focused much more on robots, that robots are in fact the much more, and I'll email this to you, she did a great video suggesting that I by not focusing on robots, I in fact betrayed my Cylon origins, that I clearly must be a Cylon
I disagree with that, man. I think that zombies are much better for what you're doing because...
Thank you.
Robots require technological infrastructure, and not every country has that, and so you can't really... I mean, I totally agree with you about using pop culture phenomenon in order to convey real information. I mean, that's how I started. That's what How to Survive a Robot Uprising is,
Right.
It's a joke, but I'm people use that.
But it's a joke based in a genre that we're all familiar with, which is why it's so effective, right?
But it's a primer for robotics courses, all over the place because it has real information. But I think that what's fun about international relations is you throw a monkey wrench into it, and then you see what falls out, and a viral spread of a disease is a great way to put a stress test on any country. Yes. And then see what's going to happen and how it's going to unfold differently, relative to the
I actually used the phrase stress test in the book, so
okay. I haven't read it yet. By the way, I'm contributing to a zombie anthology that I'll have to tell you about.
Oh, yeah, that sounds great.
You might have already been contacted about it.
It's possible. Okay, with that, though, I think we have pretty much run out of time. But, Daniel, best of luck in terms of... Well, you don't really need any luck. You've got a New York Times bestseller. And I hope the movie is as successful as the book, and good luck in your future ventures.
Thanks a lot, man. This was a lot of fun.
All right, take care.
Until next time.
Yep. Hello, my name is Daniel Drezner. I'm a blogger at foreignpolicy.com, a professor of international politics at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and the author of Theories of International Politics and Zombies. And I'm speaking with?
Oh, hi. I'm Daniel H. Wilson, author of Robopocalypse, and currently just a writer. Former roboticist, current writer.
Right, but you're being modest because we're here to obviously discuss your book, which was released, I believe, last month. in print, and also it's already been optioned for a movie by Steven Spielberg. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and in fact, I can recently start saying that I'm a New York Times best-selling author, which is kind of incredible.
Right. You've guaranteed, therefore, that the entire Blogging Heads audience will loathe and envy you tremendously, because we all think that we can have our own New York Times bestsellers.
Trust me, I was in that boat for my first 6 books that no one has heard of. So,
fair enough. Now, we should start with a little bit of your background, which is, you're not just a writer. You have a PhD in robotics from Carnegie Mellon. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I spent what I call my 20s studying robotics and robots at CMU.
And how did you segue from getting the PhD to writing novels about robots?
So, my first 6 books have all been nonfiction. So this is my first adult fiction. So I haven't been writing novels. When I was at Carnegie Mellon, I was writing a lot, and I was writing grant proposals and technical papers and research abstracts.
Really sexy stuff like that.
Yeah, really sexy stuff.
There's nothing like a good grant proposal to get.
Sell film rights, or that I somehow convinced DreamWorks, that I even had it in my mind that this was going to be a movie, and I really didn't. I mean, it was really just, I write very visually, and the conceit of the book is that it's the protagonist is describing things that he's seeing, and so it's a very visual experience. And I think that definitely lent itself immediately to people to studios reading it and going, oh, this is definitely a movie,
Yeah.
But that wasn't intentional, so whatever, it's all gravy. I'm super happy about it.
What I was wondering was the sort of iteration of it. I mean, as you said, you saw it as a book, but obviously it's a visual thing. What I was wondering is, once you sold the film rights, do you think that affected how you were writing the book? Because in some ways you knew that as you were writing the book, it wasn't just going to come out as a book, but there was going to be a movie version of it. I mean, did that affect your style?
No, absolutely not. Dude, I'm not smart enough to actually try to imagine a movie while I'm writing a book. No way. I mean, how would you do that? I mean,
this wouldn't be unprecedented. I mean, like Michael Crichton, for example, I think when he wrote Rising Sun, said it, flat out, his main character, he always saw Sean Connery as that character.
I never do that. I still have never cast this. I've never seen any character except the ones that are in my head, who are the perfect characters. But that said, I do think that this process sharpened the book a lot, because, a week after I sold it, I was down there. I was meeting with the filmmakers. I met with the screenwriter, and I met with Steven and the executives, or Mr. Spielberg, and the executives and everything.
Is that what you called him?
No, I just called him Steven. I mean, he's a human being.
There we go. Okay, yeah.
But he called me New York Times bestselling author Dr. Daniel H. Wilson. I started with his career. Definitely helped pave the way for my books. I mean, because he's been incredibly successful, and both of those books did really great. And so when you're selling a book, you want to point to other books that have done really well, and to convince a publisher that, look, this is something that's going to work,
Oh, yeah.
And so, I mean, absolutely. I'm so glad that Max Brooks has those books and that they've done so well, because it's really helped me make the case that I can write my books as well. So I've never spoken to Max.
Oh.
I can't believe it, too. I mean, I think at some point we're going to have to run into each other.
You have an email?
I'm going to have to shake his hand when I do meet him,
I have met him. He's a cool guy. He's a very down-to-earth guy. But, and the other parallel, of course, is that they're making a film version of World War Z right now, I believe starring Brad Pitt. And, as in your case, Spielberg has already optioned the book. And in fact, at what stage in the writing process were you when, in fact, the film rights had been sold?
So I wrote 100 pages of the book, and then I had an annotated table of contents describing everything else that was going to happen in the book. And then that leaked. I didn't intentionally set out to sell the film rights. I wasn't planning on doing that right then. I was trying to sell the book first to a publisher. And so that leaked.
Oh, so the book you didn't even have a publisher yet when you... Wow, this is impressive. Okay, keep going.
Well, it's impressive in the way that a person can say, I chose the lottery ticket that won the lottery. You don't particularly think that person is incredibly smart or anything for having chosen those numbers, but I think that I was really in the right place at the right time with Robopocalypse. So I think that some people think that maybe I set out to guided by, computer printouts that never really do act in the real world.
Right. This was the thing I was striking, and I'll start, with I will provide spoiler alerts when necessary. But I mean, the primary, robot actor, I guess, if you want to say, the primary actor in Robopocalypse is Arcos. But it struck me that he wasn't exactly a robot.
Yeah. So Arcos,
okay.
So Arcos is a brain in a box, yeah, or a
right.
god in a box. Once you
depending
you have
on
singularity.
Well, Arcos would say that, that he was a god in a box.
Well, it's your pre-post singularity.
What an ego! I mean, really.
So yeah, you're right. He actually has to go to a lot of trouble to manipulate people and machines around him to dig his hideout for him, put him down there, set up all his communications lines. I like to think of him as sort of like Hannibal, Hannibal Lecter. Like he's this sort of mad genius who's locked up. Who's
nevertheless
somewhere.
in the cage, but can manipulate, anything outside his environment.
Exactly.
That's
a big brain.
Okay. We'll get into the guts of the book in a second, but I have to ask, because, correct me if I'm wrong, there are striking parallels in some ways between the sort of art that you had in terms of your writing and, as someone who's an expert in the zombie genre, Max Brooks. Max Brooks started by writing a zombie survival guide, which was sort of half humorous, and then transitioned into writing World War Z, which was not humorous at all. Is I think you can say the finest zombie novel in existence. You too translated from writing How to Survive a Robot Uprising to Robopocalypse, which is in some ways a sort of similar metaphor. Now, to paraphrase Zombieland, I want you to prove to me that Max Brooks did not raise you in a secret fucking government lab.
No, Max Brooks, that exact series of movements that he went through.
Get me going.
It did keep me, well trained in how to write nonfiction, and so I had this idea to write How to Survive a Robot Uprising when I was, finishing out my degree, and it was kind of a funny idea, and it had a funny title. And I was kind of the perfect person to write it because I knew a lot about robots and I was surrounded by roboticists. And so it's a humorous book. I just went around and asked all the roboticists I knew how they would survive if their robots attacked them. And so, that's how that panned out. And it did well. And I realized, wow, I don't have to actually go build robots. I can just write about them. It's so much faster.
Proving once again those who can't do right.
It's the path of least resistance, right?
So this is supposed to, I believe, the Science Saturday for Blogging Heads, so I might as well ask a couple of at least mildly technical questions for someone who is a robot naive. Is there a technical difference between a robot and a computer?
Yeah, I think a robot is embodied in the real world, and I mean that's exactly why I got into robotics. I did an undergrad in computer science, and I was really into machine learning and artificial intelligence, and I was realizing, well, this is like a brain in a box. This isn't going to ever act in the real world in kind of the sort of way that would excite a sixth grader, which is about where I'm at. And so I think that sort of the technical description, the difference would be a robot is the sense, think, act paradigm is how I define a robot. So it's any mechanical artifact that can sense the environment using sensors, can make a decision using processors, and then can act in the real world using some sort of end effector. And that last step is what separates a robot from a computer. Although artificial intelligence lives primarily on computers, and I think a lot of decisions are made in the real world just